Good evening, friends, and shalom, and welcome to this episode of The Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you that we are living in biblical times, and I want to remind you guys that you are watching this exclusively on the Synagogue News. I want to remind you to think like a Neanderthal and hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell to get notified every time that we go live, and please do get this shared out to all the different social media platforms which you frequent, all your different friends and family, anyone who you think would be edified by the hearing of this information. Of course, what good is a message without an audience to hear it? While you're out there and getting yourself on the different social media platforms, I would like to encourage everybody to get on alternative social media platforms. If you feel like the big tech overlords are utilizing too much control over our internet free speech, there is something you can do about it, and that is using the competition. If you're on Twitter, they do have Twitter clones. Gab is my personal favorite, but Parler and Minds do very well as well. If you like Facebook, MeWe and Telegram are pretty good clones for that particular website that will respect your freedom of speech. And there is also Rumble, which I will certainly recommend anybody get on. That would be a YouTube clone, and that is where we upload these videos after the live stream, just in case we do ever end up having this channel taken down, which I think will happen at some point. I actually just recently learned today A.D. Robles had his first video censored today. So I am honored to say that I had a video censored before A.D. Robles by something like 9,900 subscribers. But anyways, I just thought that was funny. That obviously doesn't mean anything. But nonetheless, just want to remind you guys to get on those different websites. Not sponsored by any of them, but definitely do recommend that you get on those different websites. And if you don't consider yourself politically right-wing, that's perfectly fine, because you getting on these websites, being there, contributing to the conversation, expressing your opinions, and doing so freely makes the areas less of an echo chamber and makes them more of the free speech platforms that they are indeed designed to be. So you say to yourself, hey, I'm center right, not really too far right, or I'm moderate, or I'm center left, or hey, I'm even progressive. That's fine. Use the website anyway, because it's there to protect your free speech just as much as it is to protect anybody else's free speech. And you being there means it's less of an echo chamber, and then less of an echo chamber as more people like you show up, and more people of a third variety show up, and a fourth, and a fifth, and a sixth, and so on and so forth. That's the beauty of free speech platforms, right? So definitely do consider getting on those different websites there. And let's go ahead and jump right into our pre-article discussion for today. So I have another criticism to throw out of one who is typically on my side. The last 2 days, this has actually been A.D. Robles. Today, he is not going to be the one in my crosshairs, so to speak. By the way, I hope everybody knows that typically when I am criticizing these guys, I am being somewhat nitpicky. I very much admire a lot of the people like John MacArthur, like A.D. Robles, like Doug Wilson, who I'm about to criticize at the moment, who I do, voice disagreement with on this platform. A big part of the reason why I voice disagreement with them, rather than just kind of towing party line, so to speak, is because of the fact that I think we are, as people of the conservative variety, as free speech defenders and pursuers of truth, we are those who seek to get the best possible ideas out there. Meaning, if one on our side has ideas which are not the best possible, then we are trying to improve upon those ideas, or even toss those ideas out entirely in favor of good ones. Because sometimes not the best possible is what you think it is, but bad is what it really is. And so I want to go ahead and talk a little bit, with that being said, about Douglas Wilson and his idea of mere Christendom and the frequently talked about post-millennial idea of a theonomic republic in the United States of America, or indeed in whatever country you happen to live in. So for those of you who do not know, Pastor Douglas Wilson, who is the pastor at Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho, brilliant man, wordsmith. He has an idea which I do not personally agree with, which is this idea that basically we should have a theonomic, meaning governed by God's law or based in God's law, government system here in the United States, We should not have a secular society in the literal sense, meaning a society which is considered religiously neutral. Rather, we should have a government which is explicitly endorsing the Christian religion and which gives preferential treatment to Christian citizens and the Christian way of life. And Doug Wilson thinks that we should push for that. Doug Wilson thinks that we should have politicians who actively want to vote for that. And in certain ways, of course, there is elements of agreement that I have with that. For example, even though I do have reasons that are based purely in secular political philosophy to say that you shouldn't get an abortion, obviously the fact that I'm a fundamentalist Christian means that I am very much, that is very much going to be an influence on me when I talk about something like not just abortion, but of course the taking of any life, right? It's going to very much paint my opinions when it comes to the death penalty. It's going to very much paint my opinions when it comes to divorce. But all of those things, I do think there are legitimate, purely political arguments for. So it's not something that's just based in faith. Although that's just to say that's partial agreement I have with Douglas Wilson, right? Is to say, like, obviously my faith influences where a lot of my different political philosophy goes. In fact, one could even go farther. It's the primary influence, right? Because since my faith is what dictates my worldview, any of my ideas, whether they be philosophical or political or economic, if I can't straighten those out with my biblical views, right, then I toss them out. So that's also another area where I kind of agree with Pastor Wilson. But where I disagree with Pastor Wilson here is in the actual literal application of his words, right? In other words, I don't think that the state should in any way, shape, or form be giving preferential treatment to any specific group, religiously speaking, nor do I think that we should have a law that is based in a any understanding really of Mosaic law, other than to perhaps enshrine legally certain principles, but not enshrine certain laws, certainly, because I think that is absolutely contradictory to the gospel, for one. And number two, I just don't think that it would be something that could, well, it wouldn't get the results you want, I guess, is what I'm trying to say here. So let me give a perfect example. We have, obviously, in the Ten Commandments, a law which says that you cannot take the Lord's name in vain, right? Now, as a Christian, I believe wholeheartedly and sincerely that you shall not take the Lord's name in vain, period. End of the conversation, right? But what ends up happening in a situation where you start arresting people for taking the Lord's name in vain? Well, what's the literal meaning of that? The literal meaning of that is to take up the Lord's name for a vain purpose, right? So eventually it starts with policing people's speech, which you shouldn't do, right? Because that's obviously God's law. God is allowed to do that, not the individual state, right? But on top of that, then somebody else gets into control and they take this more literal interpretation, and then they happen to say, well, I don't think that predestination is very what's the word there? Very becoming of a good and loving God. I think that blasphemes God's name. That takes up his name for a righteous purpose. So you, Calvinist, you go into the cooler, right? So to speak. Or the other way around, of course. I think that God's predestination is absolutely positively obvious, and anybody who denies this is denying Scripture, and I find that to be blasphemy. So I'm going to go ahead and toss this person in the cooler. Cooler being a reference to prison here, obviously. My point here being simply that anybody who would put a pagan in jail for being a pagan will eventually put you in jail because of whatever heresy they think you believe. So when people get into this mindset of, hey, we're going to establish a Christian republic, we're going to establish a theonomy, some kind of a theocratic republic, something like that, we're going to make a Christian nation and all that kind of stuff. While I certainly agree that we should have Christ and the Bible as the absolute foundation, the unshakable foundation of our political dialogues and of our political philosophies, I do not think you can start to legislate that sort of thing, because we know where it goes, and it doesn't go to pretty places. It goes to the places that the Anabaptists had to escape from. It goes to the places that the Puritans had to escape from. It goes to the places that even the Mormons had to escape from here in our own country, because just because we have it constitutionally enshrined does not mean that we have always followed the principles of religious liberty, let me tell you, right? You don't want that society. You think you want that society because you think people like you are going to run that society. But people like you aren't always going to run that society. At some point, people who are not like you, who will put people like you in jail for thinking like you, will be the ones to run that society. And that is why you absolutely need to have a separation of, quote, church and state, meaning that you leave the church, the church politics, if you will, the church disputes, the church controversies, all that kind of stuff, to the church and the church alone, and you leave the state to the state controversies and the state laws and the state issues and stuff like that to the state and the state alone. Now, that state may be made up of members of the church, as it should be, as it should be. Praise the Lord if it is. But that is not the same thing as legislating things which should only be dealt with within the confines of the church, right? I hope that made sense, but nonetheless, I've already wasted about 10 minutes here, so let's go ahead and jump right into what I want to talk about today. First article that we have here is about Theta Care. And I decided to title this, Theta Enslaved Ya, If Only They Could. But thank the Lord, per a court ruling, they can't. And this is in regards to a recent court ruling which said that a company called Theta Care could not actually force its employees to remain with them until they found replacements for those employees, as a whole bunch of these employees had left to a different clinic known as Ascension. And this was all taking place, I believe, in Wisconsin. But we're going to go ahead and double check here. This is the article we're reading. Yeah, it says wearegreenbay.com. Judge sides with Ascension employees, or sides with Ascension, excuse me, quote, or not, hang on, let me just redo this entirely. Judge sides with Ascension. Employees can begin work immediately. My apologies. Judge sides with Ascension. Employees can begin work immediately. And again, this is about a situation where this company, known as Theta Care, was actually suing to try and keep its employees forced to work for them, right? To try and force these employees, former employees, to work for them. As a bunch of these employees had recently left to this other company, Ascension, of course, due to the very competitive market that we have. And, you know, I'm sure other things had to do with it, like the interbusiness politics there, right? Obviously, with things like vaccine mandates and all this other kind of stuff, this is something that's becoming important to people. But nonetheless, after several hours of discussion and testimony, an Outagamie County judge has ruled in favor of Ascension and those looking to work there. The 7 employees who were part of the interventional radiologist team at Theta Care resigned and can now immediately start working at Ascension. During their testimony, several of the employees said they resigned because they felt like they were being underpaid, and the circumstance around a former co-worker, man, I'm just biffing all over the place today, who had been let go. Now, this is, in my opinion, a very big thing, namely because we have a private company here, which is seeking to force employees against their will to actually be employed for them rather than seeking job opportunities elsewhere. Now, whether or not something should have been done, like, so for example, maybe it is that this was a mass walkout at a time when that couldn't have happened, and it very well could have screwed over the company Ascension as well as some of their customers, which in this case are sick people. That obviously could be problematic, excuse me. And we could all make an argument that says perhaps it wasn't the most ethical thing in the world to do for these people to walk out. But when we talk about legality, is it legal for them to walk out? Well, absolutely, right? You have the right to work wherever you want, whenever you want, at any time that you want, just as an employer has the right to tell you to kick rocks or to hire you, right? That's sort of part of being in a free society, is that you have a right to enter into these employment contracts on either side of the employment contract, namely the employer or the employee, right? In a absolutely positively free and unrestricted manner, provided, of course, that you are not committing crimes in the transaction itself, such as things like, tax fraud or money laundering or selling, crystal meth or something along those lines. Excuse me. Got to get rid of a bot here. And this company was trying to, because they felt that they had the justification to do so, actually violate the idea of a free and unrestricted employment contract, right? And trying to force these employees of theirs, these former employees of theirs, to work for this set amount of time and until they could, quote, figure out how to replace them. Now, the judge did rule, thank God, in favor of the now Ascension employees. But it's interesting that this organization actually thought that it could get away with something like this, and that at first there did seem to be some legal, legal backing behind the company ThedaCare. And the reason I want to point this out is just to say we are increasingly living in a society where at all stages of society, bosses and government officials and church officials and your teachers and employees to the employers and all this other kind of stuff, we kind of are starting to see others as nothing more than a means to our own personal ends and gratification. It's not a conspiracy, it's a society-wide phenomenon, right? In other words, this is just kind of the way that we are starting to behave as a society. ThedaCare isn't involved in some kind of backroom cabal where they're trying to work with the Pope to make sure the Jews shoot in the beams from the aliens up in the moon to get into your mind and make you do different stuff and enslave you so that you can do all the whatever kind of nonsense that comes from the next conspiracy theory you found on InfoWars, right? That's not what's going on here. What is going on here is that we have a society that is becoming more and more and more comfortable with viewing its fellow man, regardless of what position it happens to be viewing that fellow man in, with viewing its fellow man as a means to an end, that end being their own personal gratification. That's problematic, in my opinion, and it should be problematic in your opinion as well, because it's problematic as a matter of actual fact. We should not see people as nothing more than a means to achieve our goals, than a means to fill up the quota, than a means to make sure we have paying customers and those paying customers are taken care of, right? Because people are obviously individuals, and it is by virtue of having strong individuals and strong bonds and strong respects between those individuals that you end up getting strong units. Those units, of course, being made up of the individuals. Those units can be family units, neighborhood units, county units, state units, an individual company or something along those lines. But nonetheless, you need strong individuals within the units, and you need strong bonds between the individuals who make up the unit, right? And how are you going to actually achieve that sort of thing? By things like respect. For example, seeing your employees as actual people rather than just simply a way to make sure you have butts and seats. Perhaps I'm sounding a little bit like a idealist here, but I kind of thought this kind of thing was common knowledge. It seems to be less and less common knowledge as our society continues forward. 7 employees who were part of the interventional radiologist team at ThedaCare resigned and can now immediately start working at Ascension. During their testimony, several of the employers said they resigned because they felt like they were, or employees, said they resigned because they felt like they were being underpaid and a circumstance around a former coworker who had been let go. In court, Ascension also said they did not actively recruit the former ThedaCare employees, but the jobs were simply open, which of course is normal. When one person leaves a particular job and they happen to know people who worked at their former job, they tend to talk to those people and say, hey, would you like to get a job at this new place I work? Person who I know and probably like talking to, which is why I still talk to them, which is also partially why I would like to come have you work at the new job, because human beings talk to each other. Anyways, I'm just saying, like, the idea that there has to be a conspiracy behind that is just ridiculous, right? However, those with ThedaCare said that losing the employees all at once will make it difficult to provide trauma care for the community. Quote, we don't live in Chicago, New York, or Los Angeles, where this is a much larger talent pool. There are limited resources, and if we lose people, we're not going to be able to perform these life-saving procedures. It's going to have a profound effect on the community, end quote, said Dr. Raymond Georgian, however you say that, ThedaCare trauma care doctor. ThedaCare is a level 2 trauma center. The next closest level 2 trauma center is in Green Bay. Ascension issued a statement regarding the judge's decision saying, quote, we are pleased with the court's decision to dismiss the temporary restraining order preventing 7 individuals from beginning employment with Ascension, Wisconsin. We welcome our newest associates. We will continue to support our healthcare workers and staff, and we thank them for their tireless dedication to providing high-quality, compassionate care to our communities, end quote. ThedaCare's Lynn Detterman, president of ThedaCare Regional Medical Center, NENA, and senior vice president of the ThedaCare South region, has also issued a statement saying, quote, "The issue has always been about protecting our community's access to the highest level of trauma and stroke care provided in the Fox Valley region at ThedaCare Regional Medical Center, NENA. We made significant efforts to try to work with Ascension, Wisconsin to resolve the situation in a way that protects the community's access to this critical care and honors the decision of the team members who decided to leave our organization. ThedaCare's commitment to providing patients access to exceptional high-quality care is unwavering. We know the situation has put the team members who decided to leave ThedaCare in the middle of a difficult situation. Our goal was always to create a short-term, orderly transition, not to force team members to continue working at ThedaCare," which, of course, doesn't appear to be true. "As we have been, we will continue working night and day to ensure ongoing access in the short term and have secured coverage in these areas. We will also continue the significant, robust work that is underway to secure a long-term solution and continued community access for these critical care services so people can get the care that they need in their community when minutes count," end quote. Now, there is something else that is very interesting to note about this, and that is there is, of course, the question of whether or not these people should all be leaving at one point in time, considering they have such an important job and such a limited amount of people can do that job. And that is a very important question that actually directly ties into what I'm saying, right? Which is that we are beginning to live in a society that more and more sees people as just objects, as means to an end. Obviously, none of these employees seem to have considered the fact that this could drag this company down in a way that completely and totally puts them out of business. Nor have they seemed to consider the fact that this company is providing life-saving care to people, and that bringing it down means potentially bringing down the quality of life and even the life expectancy of life in the area. It could be very medically malfeasant of them, right? These things are obviously very important, and they demonstrate that these people as well, these 7 employees, are just as guilty of this thing which I am talking about, which is our society becoming more and more comfortable with seeing people as nothing more than a means to an end, right? But when it comes to legality, of course, they did have every legal right to do what they are doing. You, as a private employer, cannot force a company unless they have signed a contract, force an employee unless they have signed a contract with you to remain on your payroll. That's just not something you have the right to do. Even if you are doing very important work, guess what? Tough luck, you're a private employee or employer, and you did not have a contract with this individual that told them they must stay at such and such a time or for such and such a time, and that's your own fault. There's nothing that anybody can do about that legally. It's your fault, right? Now, does that mean that they should have done this and put this company and put these customers who indeed are sick individuals in such a predicament? No, it does not mean that. Both of these sides are guilty of seeing people as nothing more than something that's going to keep them employed or keep their business afloat. That's sort of part of my point. It's a society-wide thing. It's not some kind of secret cabal or a conspiracy, right? This is just the way our culture is going. But again, when it comes to the courts need to legislate based off of what is legally right, not what is necessarily ethically right. For example, it is legally perfectly fine to use the N-word and to even call a black person the N-word. That doesn't mean that it's ethical. Doesn't mean you should do it. It's legal, right, to tell your parents once you're 33 years old to go F themselves. That doesn't mean that it's ethical. It's legal to get ridiculously drunk every single night for the next 35 years of your life and eventually die in a pool of your own blood you peed out personally. That doesn't make it ethical. See what I'm saying? So, in this particular case, these employees have rights. Their rights are to be employed wherever the hell they damn well please. Period. Excuse my French. But that's just the facts. If we want to talk about should these people be of this kind of mentality, well, that's a good conversation for us to have. But legally, that doesn't mean anything. It just simply has to do with how we should treat individuals. And I do think we should be in such a mindset that we don't want to put our employers in a position that will destroy them. And we also don't want to put our customers in a position that, especially if our customers are somebody who are going to be patients, right? People who actually need this potentially life-saving medical care, that is going to put them in any sort of a disadvantage. I don't think we should do that. But at any rate, let's continue. An Outagamie County judge is hearing both sides. Wait a minute. Hang on. We already read. We don't need to read that. That's part of a new article. So we've already actually read this article, all the important parts of it, and we can go ahead and move on. I feel like I'm disjointed today. Am I disjointed, friends? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But nonetheless, please go ahead and like and share and all this other kind of stuff. And let's go ahead and move on to the next article. Maybe I just need to make sure I'm getting better naps. But nonetheless, we have interesting things to talk about today. So let's go ahead and talk about our next thing, which is our headliner. Justice Breyer is set to retire. That is Justice Stephen Breyer, who was appointed to the United States Supreme Court by one Bill Clinton, the 42nd president of the United States, from 1993 to 2001, for those who may be a little bit on the younger side. Which would include me, of course, and that's why I'm pointing that out. He did stop being president 21 years ago at this point. So, but nonetheless, he appointed this relatively liberal judge, Stephen Breyer, and Stephen Breyer has now said he seeks to retire and end his decades-plus career on the United States Supreme Court. And obviously that would mean give Joe Biden, or whoever is the handler of Joe Biden, the opportunity to nominate a justice of their own. Now, this would be replacing a liberal judge with a liberal judge, more than likely. Obviously, we can't see the future, but there is little to no doubt that the handlers of Joe Biden are going to have him appoint somebody who is quite progressive. But Stephen Breyer himself is quite progressive, so in that sense, it isn't going to change the balance of power in any serious way. It could in one sense, which is potentially getting us another Roman Catholic on the court. I'll talk about that in a moment. But let's go ahead and look at the next article we have for today, which is going to come from NBC News. And it's going to talk about this breaking news we have today, which is that Justice Stephen Breyer has announced he will retire from the United States Supreme Court, thus giving the opportunity for the Biden administration to appoint a justice of their own. So let's go ahead and read. Justice Stephen Breyer to retire from Supreme Court, paving way for Biden appointment. The liberal justice's decision to step down after more than 27 years on the court allows the president to appoint a successor who could serve for decades. And of course, this is no doubt something that is planned. While Breyer may have, his own personal reasons for wanting to retire, he is rather old. There is also no doubt in my mind that he is, because he's a politically astute person, and all these people are politically astute people, right? So this is something that factors into all of their different decisions. It's not like Stephen Breyer is unique here. But nonetheless, I'm sure that part of why he is retiring is because he knows that he's an old man with, not long on this earth, praise the Lord. And many years of good repentance to him if he decides to go down the path of Christ, if the Lord wills. But nonetheless, he knows this, and he knows that because time is short, that means somebody's going to be appointing his replacement soon. And if somebody can appoint his replacement now, then he can guarantee that that replacement is somebody who thinks like him, namely progressively. Namely, thinks of the Constitution as a living document, and not under the originalist mindset, which is the mindset which tries to ascertain what the founders themselves wished to communicate, ascertain what the original meaning of this language was, right? Now, of course, again, I don't think that Biden himself is going to be appointing the president. The Supreme Court justice. I think whoever handles Biden is really going to be the one making the decision, and then Biden is going to vocalize the words, hey, such and such is going to be on the Supreme Court. But nonetheless, I just wanted to point out that I think that this was certainly an opportunity taken by a liberal justice to get another liberal justice on the court for, obviously decades on end. He himself served 27 years. Just imagine that, we get another person who is on this court 27 years. That would mean 2049 is when this liberal justice's term ends. That, of course, assumes he serves as long as Breyer did, and etc. But you see why this is something one would want to do if one wanted to maintain one's own personal opinions in the court, or on the court, excuse me. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and jump into this. This is, again, NBC News we are reading from. Justice Stephen Breyer will step down from the Supreme Court at the end of the current term, according to people familiar with his thinking. President Joe Biden and Breyer are scheduled to appear together at the White House Thursday as the Supreme Court justice is set to announce his retirement. A source familiar with the matter confirms to NBC News. And of course, the fact that they are meeting with each other is obviously not coincidental, in my opinion, either. In fact, they probably discussed this with each other because, again, you got to understand these guys are politicians, all of them, right? It's not just Breyer. Alito's a politician. Kavanaugh's a politician. Roy Moore in Alabama is a politician. They're all politicians, right? Judge is just a different kind of politician, but they are all politicians, and they're all trying to plan and scheme and all the other different words that describe planning and scheming, which I can't think of at the moment. They're trying to make these backroom deals so that their particular agenda is pushed forward, and the agenda of whoever they disapprove of is not pushed forward. Politics really isn't that complicated, right? It's kind of like WWE in a way, with the exception being that the factions do legitimately exist, right? It's just then you have people within the factions talking to other members of the same faction to try and make sure that their faction gets ahead of the other faction who is doing the same thing. You see what I'm saying? President Joe Biden and Breyer already read that. Breyer is one of 3 remaining liberal justices, and his decision to retire after more than 27 years on the court allows Biden to appoint a successor who could serve for decades in the short term, maintain the current 6-3 split between conservative and liberal justices. Now, real quick, it is important to note, when we say conservative and liberal justices, that means 2 things. Number one, and this is more technically what it means, is judges appointed by Republicans versus judges appointed by Democrats, right? Obviously, Chief Justice Roberts is not a conservative, if we go by the second definition, which I'll explain here in a moment. But, excuse me, I'm losing my train of thought. I'm just sort of tired today. I'm sorry. Nonetheless, the definition that these guys are using when they say 6-3 is they're talking about judges who are appointed by Republicans versus judges who were appointed by Democrats. The judges who were appointed by Republicans being Justice Roberts, Kavanaugh, Barrett, and Gorsuch, obviously, and then Alito and Clarence Thomas. As far as the actual definition of those words, judicially speaking, what we're referring to is those who see the Constitution in an originalist way, which is, as I said earlier, trying to ascertain what the founders were trying to say, trying to ascertain the literal reading of the words as they were written, when they were written, right? And then trying to rule on the basis of that interpretation, versus those who see the Constitution as a living document, which means we apply the principles of the Constitution to our modern lives, letting it evolve with our lives as they progress into the future, right? And if that is what we mean, then the split is probably closer to 5-4, although I would argue it's actually closer to 3-6. Only 3 people on the courts are, in my opinion, truly originalists, and that would be Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, and it does appear, I'll be honest, Brett Kavanaugh. Somewhat shocked to say that. I thought Brett Kavanaugh was totally going to be liberal. He's obviously not been on very long, but so far, he has been better than I thought. I'll say that much, because that's not much, but better than I thought. But nonetheless, it's just important to note when they say these, there's a 6-3 split of conservative and liberal justices, that it really depends on how you want to define those words, what that even means. Nobody thinks that Justice Roberts is on the conservative side on most issues, and I think very little people are convinced that Barrett and Gorsuch are originalists, right? What they really mean is 6 judges who have been appointed by a Republican versus 3 judges who have been appointed by a Democrat. Excuse me. At 83, Breyer is the court's oldest member. Liberal activists have urged him for months to retire, while Democrats hold both the White House and the Senate, which of course goes back to what I was saying earlier about this not being coincidental by any stretch. This is a planned event, of course. But anyways, a position that could change after the midterm elections in November. They contend that Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg stayed too long despite her history of health problems and should have stepped down during the Obama administration. Ginsburg's death from cancer at 87 allowed then-President Donald Trump to appoint her successor, Amy Coney Barrett, moving the court farther to the right, which, of course, these people don't mind if the court is farther to any particular side on the political spectrum. They just want it to be farther on their side of the political spectrum. And that is something that I think is important for us to always note, because everybody likes to pretend like their particular motives are noble. And what they mean by noble is objective. I'm just trying to maintain the integrity of the court. No, you're not. You want people who agree with you to be on the court. Now, I'll just come out and say it. I want people who agree with me to be on the court. Okay? Don't be fooled about that. I would like people who see the Constitution as originalists, preferably people who are laissez-faire capitalists, American nationalists, and Burkean-style traditionalist conservatives. I am not shy about that. That is the people I want on the court. And you should know that, because if I tell you anything else, I'm being dishonest. And you may not like what I just said to you as far as who I would like on the court, but somebody who's dishonest and believes like me is a threat to you. I'm no threat to you. I'm a political adversary. But if somebody believes the way I believe, but is insidious about it, or believes the way you believe and is insidious about it for that matter, that person is a threat. That person is dishonest. That person is malicious. That person will scheme and connive to try and get what they want politically, to try and push their agenda at the expense of whoever there happens to be expense to be had. I don't think I worded that correctly. But you guys know what I'm trying to say, right? But at any rate, I just read that. Biden said in brief remarks to the press on Wednesday that he will leave it to Breyer to formally announce the retirement, which obviously, I mean, it's not like the president has the right to announce the retirement of a judge on his behalf. But at any rate, quote, let him make whatever statement he's going to make, and I'll be happy to talk about it later, end quote, he said. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki had earlier, I don't know why I said later, that's perfectly fine, I can English, I swears it, had earlier tweeted a statement saying, it has always been the decision of any Supreme Court justice if and when they decide to retire and how they want to announce it, and that remains the case today, end quote. The White House had no additional details or information to share, she added. It's actually quite amazing that this is something that people actually need to be reminded of. Well, can't the president just remove him? No, he can't. Read the Constitution, please. They're like $2. Go buy yourself a little pocket Constitution. In fact, if you just go to like a lot of different conservative political rallies, right? They pass them out for free, yo. So literally you just show up there for all of 5 seconds and get yourself a free Constitution and then go home. It's not that difficult to read. It's like a total of 50 pages. Probably a lot less than that, to be honest with you. I'm probably way over exaggerating the amount of pages, especially considering that my book that I have is both the United States Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. So it's actually longer than just the United States Constitution. And it's probably still not even close to 50 pages, probably like 20 pages. But regardless, White House just read that. Erwin Chemerinsky, dean of the University of California, Berkeley School of Law, urged Breyer to retire in a Washington Post op-ed article in May, writing that there are times, quote, when the stewards of our system must put the good of an institution they love and of the country they love above their own interests. They have to recognize that no one, not even a brilliant justice, is irreplaceable, and that the risks presented by remaining are more than hypothetical, end quote. Now, again, let's recall the risks. The risks are not the integrity of the court is compromised. The risks are not the rule of law somehow is compromised. The risks are not that we will not see equal application of the law or equality under the law. No, the problem that we have here, the threat, the risk, is that we might have somebody else who is appointed by a Republican. That's the risk. Okay. Again, I find it incredibly dishonest that we are living in a world, which we always have been. There's nothing new in this particular regard, right? This is since the dawn of human history. But nonetheless, it's a fallen world, and it's a world where people like to sit up here and pretend, well, I'm just trying to pretend to protect the integrity of this system. I'm noble. I'm just. And me. Everything that I do is flawless and gold, and everything that you do smells the way that fertilizer smells. And farmers will know what I mean, right? At any rate, though, this is nothing more than again, I'm not saying that Republicans don't also do this. They totally do. I'm not saying that I don't participate in this because, again, I'm being very honest with you guys. I would like 9 out of 9 of the justices to be constitutional originalists. I think the fact that that's a question is deeply concerning. Of course, you should be a constitutional originalist. That's sort of the whole point, right? But with that said, I'm not sitting up here pretending to you guys, well, I'm just trying to defend the integrity of the system, right? Because that's ridiculous. This is scheming, this is plotting, this is conniving, trying to make sure that the other side doesn't get a seat or get another seat, and that our side gets to maintain that seat, because that's what true justice is whatever our side is winning. I just want people to read through the nonsense while we're obviously getting all the story. Biden promised on the campaign trail to nominate a black woman to the court, which is both racist and sexist, by the way. And I'm not saying that as a joke. That is literally both racist and sexist to say specific. Like, if I got up and said, I will only nominate a white male above the age of 60 who is Protestant fundamentalist Christian, you would say, well, what's wrong with young people? You would say, well, what's wrong with mainline Protestants or Catholics or Jews? You would say, well, what's wrong with women? You would say, well, what's wrong with non-white people? I'm talking to the liberal, of course, not to the people who would regularly watch this program or listen to this program. But nonetheless, if I would, you just put the shoe on the other foot, you guys have a really big problem with that, right? But when it's, no, we got to make sure it's a black progressive woman on this court. Somehow, that's not politically biased. Somehow, that's not incredibly racist. Somehow, that's not incredibly sexist. I'm not saying all three of those things are the same, by the way. But it's just funny to me. Let's go ahead and continue. In the wake of Breyer's announcement, there was an outpouring of statements calling for him to follow through. The progressive group hired a truck last year to drive around Washington with the sign, Breyer retire, it's time for a black woman Supreme Court justice, because apparently that sort of thing matters. I don't know why it matters, but I guess it does matter. The genitalia you happen to have been born with by the choice of sovereign God and by no choice of your own, and also the skin color, which you inherited as birthright, that you literally had nothing to do with, has some sort of bearing on what kind of a justice you're going to be. I don't know. Sounds racist to me, but what do I know? I'm just some white dude, right? Among likely contenders are U.S. Circuit Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson of the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, a former Breyer law clerk, and Leandra Kruger, a justice on the California Supreme Court. Ugh. Ugh. Gag unto me with a spoon. Jackson, formerly a district court judge in Washington, was nominated by Biden to the U.S. Circuit Court and was confirmed by the Senate in mid-June on a 53-44 vote, including 3 Republicans. She succeeded Merrick Garland, who left the appeals court to become Biden's attorney general, and we all know how that has turned out. Senator Patty Murray, a Democrat from Washington, was among those who issued a statement soon after the news of Breyer's impending retirement, calling on Biden to uphold his pledge to nominate a black woman as the next justice. I say we start a campaign. We will only accept white men on the court, and let's just see how that flies. And when people start saying, I think that that's incredibly racist, we will just go ahead and plaster these quotes on our foreheads, get a black woman on the court, and we'll let them try and explain why we're racist and they're not. And preferably we'll do this on live television. Obviously, I'm joking, but To be honest with you, I don't actually think that's a bad plan. The court should reflect the diversity of our country. And it is unacceptable that we have never in our nation's history had a black woman sit on the Supreme Court of the United States. I want to change that, end quote, she said. Why is that unacceptable? Why is that unacceptable? This is a genuine question. Why is that unacceptable? What is unacceptable about that? What moral wrong has been done by the fact that no black woman has actually sat on the... By the way, black women are 6.5% of the population. If you want to talk about accurately reflecting the demographics of this country, right? Not very much. Pretty small amount, actually. But apparently it's some great travesty that we've never had a black woman sit on the court. I just don't understand that. I don't understand that at all. I don't sit up here and talk about how much of a travesty it is that we've never had a Native American governor of Ohio, or that we've never had a oneness Pentecostal senator from Maine. I'm just kind of throwing out terms here, but the point is that no ice cream truck driver that I know of has ever been the mayor of St. Augustine, Florida. Are we going to call it discrimination now? Is that some great moral travesty? Nuremberg trials all around. Apparently, human rights have been violated because an ice cream truck driver has not been the mayor of St. Augustine, freaking Florida. Now, of course, we all know what the point is supposed to be. They want to get that base all riled up. Oh, those racist white Americans. Right? But what are you actually accomplishing? Nothing. What actual wrong has been done to you? Nothing. You're just a bunch of crybabies. You're just a bunch of crybabies. I'll tell you what, there is not a single person out of the 538 members of the United States Senate and the 15 members of the cabinet and the president and vice president and the 50 different governors of the United States, not a single one of them considers themselves to be a Burkean conservative, which is my personal political ideology. Not a single one of them would call themselves a fundamentalist Christian, with the possible, very, very, very possible exception of Ted Cruz. Right? I don't sit here and say I'm being discriminated against. Being discriminated against. What kind of nonsense is that? I have Jewish blood. How many Jews are sitting in the Senate right now? Like 2? I think there's Sanders. He's the only one I know of. It's completely absurd. It's completely absurd. The idea that this is somehow I don't know. It's mind-blowing to me that a woman actually was confident enough in this sentence. She was confident enough in the thoughts rattling around in her little head to actually vocalize this in public. That's mind-blowing to me. And I'm not being facetious, by the way. I'm being 100% serious. She actually thought society is such a way that I'm going to vocalize these words and I will not be laughed out of Congress hysterically with everybody pointing and saying this absolute buffoon. And the craziest part is she's right. She's totally right. This is not considered mockable or contemptible in modern day America. What the hell is that? I don't get it. I don't get it. Senate Majority Whip Dick Durbin, a Democrat from Illinois, echoed these sentiments in a tweet saying Biden has the opportunity to bring diversity, experience, and an even-handed approach to the administration of justice. It's even-handed, so long as it's applied by a black woman progressive appointed by a Democrat. Just want to make sure we're getting our terminology correct. I hope you guys are entertained by this. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, a Democrat from New York, said Biden's nominee will, quote, receive a prompt hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee and will be considered and confirmed by the full United States Senate with all deliberate speed. America owes Justice Breyer an enormous debt of gratitude, end quote, Schumer added. I don't personally believe that, but I do believe that you should show respect for authority. So I will say the man served 27 years as a justice on our highest court. He does deserve due honor for that. That's probably not something that is, common to hear in conservative circles. But whatever we think of the man, he was one of the 9 highest-ranking judges in the country for a solid 27 years. That does come with a certain level of respect. We should give him that respect because we should be people who respect institution. It's just my opinion, but I think hierarchy is important. And I have very often failed in that, by the way. But nonetheless. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, who voted for Justice Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan, said if Democrats hang together, as he expects, then they will have the power to replace Breyer without one Republican vote, which is probably true. I think it's definitely true, actually, because if you count the Republicans plus the independents, who both are Democrat-leaning, Angus Young of Maine and Bernie Sanders of Vermont, and then you would also have the tie-breaking vote of Vice President Kamala Harris, that would get you 51. That would allow you to actually push forward without a single Republican vote. In fact, I might have even done my math wrong there because I feel like there's only 48 Republicans. So I'm missing something. Anyways, it'll come to me at some point. Or maybe I'm just wrong about the number of Republicans. But at any rate, Republican Senator, I just read that. Quote, elections have consequences, and that is most evident when it comes to fulfilling the vacancies on the Supreme Court, end quote, Graham said in a statement. That's obviously true. If you elect a certain group of people, you do have to deal with the consequences of their policies, right? For example, if any sort of natural disaster happens, if war breaks out, if there is an economic catastrophe, if they get to appoint somebody to a very important position, well, you elected them and you knew you couldn't see the future, but you did know from the past what kinds of things could happen in the future. And also you can read the tea leaves, so to speak, to see what kinds of things will happen in the future. And now the future is here, and the election now all of a sudden has different meaning. But it doesn't actually have different meaning. It always had this meaning, right? You just obviously hadn't seen that meaning manifested yet. What's the point? Take your election seriously. But at any rate, despite calls from Biden supporters to add more seats to the Supreme Court to counter its current conservative lean, yes, literally change the rules. Literally, we are going to add more seats to the Supreme Court because we don't like the fact that there's people on the Supreme Court who disagree with us. Tell me that these people are not blatantly corrupt, and I will sell you beachfront property in Montana. Breyer said in March that such a move would risk undermining confidence in the court. And thank you for that, Justice Breyer. That is, again, for all his faults, 100% agree with you there. Maintaining the integrity of the court, despite the fact that it has a bias against people who think like you. That's true integrity right there. And a lot of respect goes to Justice Breyer for that. Advocates of court packing, he said, should think long and hard before embodying those changes in law. Very true. Very true. Appointed by President Bill Clinton, Breyer came to the Supreme Court in 1994 and became one of the court's moderate to liberal members, though he often said it was misleading to label justices with such terms, and I do happen to agree. What we're talking about, like I said earlier, is either, typically the news is talking about those appointed by Republican presidents and those appointed by Democratic presidents, but when we're actually using the terms conservative and liberal with any meaning, we tend to be referring to those who think of the Constitution from an originalist mindset and those who think of the Constitution from a more progressive mindset or as a living document, right? Breyer believed that interpreting the Constitution should be based on practical considerations, changing with the times. This is that living document thing I was telling you about, as I have already explained. That put him at odds with conservative justices who said the court must be, who said, that the court must be guided by the original intent of the founders, which is known as originalism, and that would be my own personal view. Quote, the reason that I do that is because the law is general, or the law in general, I think, grows out of communities of people who have some problems they want to solve, he said in an interview. End quote, he said in an interview. Breyer wrote the court's opinion striking down a state law that banned late-term abortions in 2000 and dissented 7 years later when the Supreme Court upheld a similar federal law passed by Congress. He supported affirmative action and other civil rights measures And in a widely noted dissent in 2015, he said the death penalty in America had become so arbitrary that it's probably unconstitutional. And by the way, just to point out, just so nobody gets confused, because I talked about how Justice Breyer was a justice for 27 years and deserves his respects. That obviously does not mean I agree with the kind of person that he was as far as his track record is concerned, because he's still living, right? But obviously, any defense of abortion, from my perspective, is evil. I'm an abolitionist when it comes to that particular issue, meaning I want it to be fully criminalized. Also, I think that the death penalty is absolutely legal and should be carried out with impunity when it comes to certain crimes, namely unprovoked murder, trafficking of human beings, rape, or pedophilia. I also think that torture probably would be something that is worthy of the death penalty. Now, outside of those very specific crimes, it obviously should not even be considered. But absolutely, I do find it to be completely, but then the founders absolutely found it to be constitutional for those things as well, which is why every single one of them actually had death penalties in their presidencies / governorships, depending on what particular political positions they happen to go to, right? Biden is expected to act quickly to nominate a successor who can be ready to serve when the court's new term begins on October the 3rd. A former chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Biden knows firsthand how the confirmation process works. And that ends the article here. So obviously that was fun and got us some interesting news that we all need to know about. Appreciate y'all who are here so far. We got some more stuff to talk about, so we're going to go ahead and talk about the stuff that we have to talk about. At any rate, while I'm pulling up the next screen share here, I want to remind you guys, please do like and share this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so, and hit that bell to get notified every time we go live. Try to make that Monday, Wednesday, and Friday by the Lord's grace. If you like this content, please consider sharing it to all the different social media platforms you frequent. Get this out to your friends and family. Try to get them to subscribe here. We want to make this a legitimate news podcast, a la the Tucker Carlson show, the Ben Shapiro show, all that kind of stuff, right? Something that is taken seriously. But of course, we only want that if we deserve to be taken seriously. I speak in the third person royal we here, but it's only because I find myself great. I'm kidding, by the way. That's totally a joke. But nonetheless, please consider liking and sharing and subscribing and getting this out to social media platforms and all the various things that I've said already. And let's go ahead and get into our next article. Let me pull it up here. Just one moment. All right, I've decided to title this segment, Are Skies Blue on Your Planet? Or Discussing the Obvious. Because we're talking about abortion again. Everybody's favorite topic that CJ likes to rant on, abortion, right? A group of SC, that's South Carolina senators, are set to discuss a total abortion ban. This is according to WYFF, that is a local South Carolina news group affiliated with NBC. Read that title one more time. Group of South Carolina senators set to discuss a total abortion ban. Now, I have titled this thus because, in my opinion, the idea that abortion should be banned totally is just as obvious as the idea that the sky is blue. It's just as obvious as the idea that human beings need water to live. It's just as obvious as the idea that cardinals are red, and it's just as obvious as the idea that gravity pulls people down and not up, right? It's obvious, in other words. You don't kill babies. It shouldn't be legal. There's no reason for it to be legal. Your weird beliefs about your bodily autonomy do not override somebody's right to live when you yourself have made decisions that have caused that person to live in the first place, right? So, are the skies blue on your planet? Or, to put this a different way, should we criminalize abortion? Yes, of course, obviously, duh. What planet do you live on? I live on planet reality, right? In the multiverse, with all the different infinite possibilities, I live in the one that has the possibility of actually existing. And all these other ones are just weird thought experiments. Here in reality, this is a no-duh kind of a thing. Of course, it should be criminalized. You should not have legalization of the taking of innocent human life. So either you need to make an argument that it's not innocent, you need to make an argument that it's not human, or you need to make an argument that it's not alive. And if you can't make any of those arguments, which, by the way, you can't, then there is no reason whatsoever for you to even be considered. This was solved when we realized first that human beings had opposable thumbs. In other words, the dawn of time. Anyways, the Senate Medical Affairs is a subcommittee. The Senate Medical Affairs Subcommittee meeting is scheduled for 9 a.m. on Wednesday. That was today. And we will have updates on this particular issue next Friday, but they did not have updates at the time of me trying to pull this up. State senators are getting ready to hear from the public on a bill that would ban all abortions in South Carolina if the U.S. Supreme Court allows it. Now, I personally, like our Republican candidate for governor, Ammon Bundy, by the way, Ammon Bundy 2022, if you live in Idaho, but nonetheless, I, like he, believe that the United States, meaning the individual states, have the right actually to tell the court to take a hike on this one. The court had no right to legislate from the bench. The Constitution does not allow them to do so. Most of these states already have laws on the books which outlaw abortion outright, and all they need to do is simply enforce that. And just frankly tell the court, like I said, to take a hike. Sorry. I mean, what are you going to do? Your choices are basically let us make abortion illegal or we'll fight a war about it. And I don't know about you, but I'm actually willing to fight a war about that. I don't think, like, obviously I don't advocate for a civil conflict. But that's the gravity of this issue, in my opinion. If the government or if the lefties decided, hey, I think this is a fighting issue, I say your terms are acceptable, personally. I say that with trepidation. I don't say it lightly. And I say it as somebody who firmly believes that we are not to take the first shot, right? In fact, we're not to take the first couple. It needs to be firmly established that the left seeks to fight us on this issue, not the other way around, simply because that is the nature of our political ideology. But if this is an issue which the left seeks to die on, a hill which they seek to die on, it is an issue which I seek to kill on. You can take that as literally or metaphorically as you like. The proposal would define that life begins at fertilization, and any doctor who performs an abortion after that point could face similar charges to murder. The bill says birth control and other contraception methods would not be outlawed, and abortions could be performed if a mother's life is in danger or an egg was fertilized outside the womb. Excuse me. The Senate Medical Affairs Subcommittee meeting is scheduled for 9 a.m. on Wednesday. And that's the end of that article, I think. Yes, it is. And again, we will have further information to actually give you guys on that in a moment. Let me go ahead and see if I can find anything on it right now. But just wanted to let you guys know that South Carolina is seeking to take the bold move of absolutely and positively outlawing it entirely. And look, here's the thing. Like, people might think that my views on this issue are radical. People might think that my views on this issue are extreme. But this is the kind of mentality we need to have. If we truly believe, if we actually genuinely believe that 900,000 babies are executed by their own so-called mothers every single year, if we truly believe that, then the idea that you would be moderate is revolting. Absolutely revolting. Okay? This idea that you can be pro-life, but we only want to reduce the amount of abortions from 900,000 to 872,000, right? And then we're going to wave our little pro-life flags and say we won something. No, sorry. Me and you have fundamentally different understandings of what this issue is, if that's what you consider a victory. Okay? I think that this issue is as bad as taking orphans out and blowing their heads off because they don't have parents and nobody's going to be able to take care of them. It's the same logic. I think this is just as bad as going to a mental facility and saying, hey, these people have autism, these people have Down syndrome, let's go ahead and kill them. It's the same logic. I think this is just as bad as saying, hey, I don't think that I am financially able to take care of this child, so you smother it in your bathtub, because it's literally the same logic. And again, I'm not willing to start the fight over this. I am willing to make it illegal and to punish it. However, I'm not willing to start the civil strife over this issue. But if it is an issue that the other side wishes to have civil strife over, I mean, you got to have some line. Lines must be drawn at some point. If this is not a legitimate reason, none exists. And again, that is if and only if violent terms are imposed on us. But what does that mean? If they're not going to impose violent terms on us, then guess what? Move forward. You have the laws on the books. Make it illegal. Nobody on the entire planet would say, hey, a state doesn't have the right to make slavery illegal because the federal government hasn't yet in the 1850s. Wasn't even remotely considered. So in a way, this is actually worse than the slavery issue. In the slavery issue, we didn't force Maine to maintain the institution of slavery. But on the abortion issue, we do force Idaho to maintain the institution of baby murder. And to even pay for it with taxpayer money. Real quick, there is an update here I can give you guys. Total abortion ban advances in South Carolina legislature. Let's go ahead and share a little bit about this. This is from the Sacramento Bee. I'm not sure how liberal they are, so we may have to deal with some crap. Total abortion ban advances in South Carolina legislature. A group of South Carolina lawmakers on Wednesday advanced a proposal to ban all abortions in the state should the U.S. Supreme Court overturn the nationwide right to the procedure, which is going very far, and I appreciate it, but they should go a little bit farther, which is they should tell the courts, kick rocks. Sorry, not interested. You can try to enforce this at the point of a gun, in which case we have a very serious problem, right? Or I'm going to continue to operate how I see fit. If you can let California violate federal law, legalizing pot, then you can let me violate federal law, quote unquote, by illegalizing the indiscriminate slaughter of children in the womb. Following the subcommittee's vote, the full Senate Medical Affairs Committee is now poised to consider that measure, along with a second bill requiring doctors to tell women receiving drug-induced abortions about a controversial method, to possibly halt the abortion process. The first proposal will define that life begins at fertilization, and any doctor who performs an abortion after that point could face similar charges to murder, as they should. The bill also says birth control and other contraception methods would not be outlawed, and abortions could be performed if a mother's life is in danger or an egg was fertilized outside the womb. I have no complaints there. My only complaint here is that it does not actually, number one, go far enough as to say we're going to enforce this regardless of what the federal government thinks. And number two, I do think there should be punishments for the mother. I'm not shy about that by any stretch. If passed by the Republican-controlled state legislature, the law would take effect if the U.S. Supreme Court were to overturn Roe v. Wade, the 1973 landmark decision that protected abortion rights across the country, and turn that decision over to states. About a dozen states have had similar laws. Senator Richard Cash, a Republican from Anderson sponsoring the bill, said in a public hearing that South Carolina needed to join states that with so-called trigger laws. The General Assembly should pass the law before the end of the session, Cash added, noting that the U.S. Supreme Court is likely to issue a decision over a Mississippi law banning abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy this summer that could undermine Roe. Hopefully, it undermines Roe. Hopefully. If the Lord be with the judges there. But, of course, his will be done. Opponents of the bill have argued it restricts women's bodily autonomy and would also have consequences, including barring people from some fertility treatments and forcing women who experience miscarriages to be scrutinized under the law. Now, obviously, that is not going to happen. Women who got miscarriages were not scrutinized under the law before 1973. So there's no reason to think that it would happen after the repeal of Roe v. Wade. Excuse me. Also, I don't think this would lead to any restrictions on fertility treatments by any stretch of the imagination. It's already taking into account the fact that, for example, you would have to have abortion for the right of the mother's life. I don't know any conservative who has ever said that we should outlaw abortions in cases of threat to the mother's life, because obviously at that point you literally have to make a choice. Do you take both lives or one life? I think the math is fairly simple there, right? You save the life that can be saved. But again, I don't know of a single conservative on the entire planet. And I'm an abolitionist, by the way. So the people I listen to on this issue are what you would call pro-life radicals, right? I don't know a single conservative on the planet who has ever said that we need to charge women for miscarriages or investigate women for miscarriages, or who has said that we need to outlaw fertility treatments or abortion in cases of threat to the mother's life. Lawmakers said they would consider amendments to address issues of rape, incest, and assisted reproduction as the legislation moves forward. I do not think those should be added. I don't think it makes any sense to kill a baby who is conceived in rape because of the rapist. I think we should kill the rapist. I think that we should reverse that ridiculous ruling in 1977, which said that that was somehow cruel and unusual punishment in violation of the United States Constitution as a result. That's absolutely not cruel and unusual punishment. Rapists should be executed. But should babies be executed for being conceived during a rape? I don't think so. I don't think that that's just. Now, that is not to say that I do not have an absolutely ridiculous amount of sympathy for women who would have to go through that. That sounds like the most miserable thing in the world. I would go as far as to say, as a church man, I believe the church should do everything within their power to take care of those women, and to help take care of those children, and to help take care of those children if the women decide that they don't want to raise those children in forms of adoption and stuff like that. That is where the church is supposed to shine, I think. And we should, as a society, absolutely want to. Now, I don't think we should do this at the point of the government. I think we should do this through charity, through churches, things like that. But I do think we as a society absolutely should be in the business of, making sure that these women are taken care of, that they are well provided for, that they are not feeding off of the hands of the state, or having to put themselves in some sort of a compromised position where they or their children or both are going to be negatively impacted by society around them, right? I think we should do everything within our power to help women who have to go through these absolute, this is one of the most awful things that you can go through, right? Not the most awful thing, but you can imagine obviously having to carry the seed of a person who violated you. And that's not something you really can imagine as a man, obviously, because that's not even a possibility for you, right? So if we are going to take such a hard stance on this as I do, I think that we should, number one, take a very hard stance against sexual predators. They need to be executed. No qualms about that. I absolutely seek the repentance of their soul. Don't get me wrong. But as far as the politics is concerned, they need to be executed. And I think we as society should absolutely go out of our way to take care of abused women and widowed women and orphaned children and anything of that nature to ensure that their lives are just as absolutely fantastic as it's possible for us to make them. And I mean that. I genuinely mean that. That is part of what having a church, having a community is all about. Both of those things separately, right? That's what your neighbors are supposed to be, that are the people who will take care of you in those kinds of situations. Your country, your county, your city should be willing to take care of you in those situations. Your friends and family should be willing to take care of you in those situations. Not to the point of where you're abusing that system, right? But we should be going out of our way to want to make sure our poor, our destitute, our orphaned, our widowed, our assaulted, right? We should be going out of our way to make sure that those people are taken care of, because that is just the kind of people we seek to be. That is the kind of nation we seek to have. That is the kind of community and neighborhood and everything else that you want, church, everything else that you want. That is what we seek to build, right? So, I do want to just point that out. If we're gonna take this kind of position, then we need to be the first in line to say, to step in when men are overstepping their boundaries, and protect women who need protection. We need to be the first in line to step in and say, hey, I can contribute somehow, some way, whether that's adopting a child or helping financially or watching the child and babysitting or something like that, or whatever it is, right? I don't know. There's a million things you can do, but do something. Do something. Don't just, excuse me, sit there and, try to believe all orphan kids into having good lives, or believe all raped women into being taken care of, or believe all widowed women into having some sort of financial stability, because that's not how it works. You got to actually do something. So do something. There's a million somethings you can do, but be charitable, be generous, take care of your community. Quote, my rights as a woman do not supersede a baby's right to live, end quote, testified Kelly Rowe, a board member of Personhood SC. I wouldn't word it like that, but she's absolutely right. I don't think you have a right to take a life just because you're a woman, right? Just because that life happens to be inside you. So I wouldn't have worded it the way that she worded it, but what she's trying to say, I agree with, right? Is just to say that, the rights that we have as human beings do not include the right to take an innocent human being's life. Lawmakers also advanced a proposal that would require physicians to give patients receiving the 2-dose drug a written statement saying that the abortion could potentially be reversed after the first pill, a stance experts have disputed. I guess I don't know enough about that to comment. Supporters of the bill, including Republican Representative John McCravey, framed the measure as a way to give pregnant women another choice. The American College of Obstetricians, I probably said that wrong, and gynecologists deemed the so-called abortion reversal procedures unproven and unethical. At UC Davis, researchers said in 2019, they had to halt a randomized clinical study on the reverse procedure after 3 women experienced severe bleeding and had to go to the ER, leading researchers to warn that not completing the 2-drug abortion pill sequence could result in hemorrhage, which is probably just another reason why you shouldn't do it. But anyways, perhaps that's God's judgment. Perhaps. We don't want to speak too boldly on something like that, right? Multiple obstetrician gynecologists testifying Wednesday argued the measure would harm patients and damage the physician-patient relationship by requiring doctors to provide misinformation. The proposal, quote, forces me to lie, to say something that I know is untrue and potentially dangerous, end quote, said Carol Allen, one of those physicians. Still, supporters of the measure cited anecdotal evidence, instances, of women carrying pregnancies to term after not completing the 2-dose abortion sequence, including a woman who brought her 18-month-old son to the hearing as proof of the so-called abortion reversal pills efficacy. One family practice doctor, Dr. Brian Casey, claimed to lawmakers that he had seen scores of babies saved by prescribing such off-label medication to women over 13 years of practice in South Carolina. About a dozen states have passed similar laws requiring doctors to inform patients of so-called abortion reversal procedures, according to the Guttmacher Institute, a research organization that supports so-called abortion rights. The federal judges have blocked the measure from taking effect in Indiana, North Dakota, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. South Carolina's General Assembly passed a law banning most abortions last year, thank the Lord. It requires doctors to perform ultrasounds to check for a so-called fetal heartbeat, which can typically be detected about 6 weeks after conception, thank the Lord. If cardiac activity is detected, the abortion can only be performed if the pregnancy was caused by rape or incest or the mother's life was in danger. Medical experts say the cardiac activity is not an actual heartbeat, but rather an initial flutter of electrical activity within cells of the embryo. To be honest with you, I don't really care. This is one of those issues where it's like I'll use any excuse I can get to make sure that you can't do it, because the fact is it is alive, right? And it's alive at conception. So whether or not we can detect the actual beating of a heart is somewhat irrelevant. If I can use that as a legal loophole to make sure you're not taking this life, then I'll take it. But you know, as I say that though, I kind of don't like the dishonesty about that. So maybe I don't like that. Anyways, I'll have to think about that. Let's see. They say the heart doesn't begin to form until the fetus is at least 9 weeks old, and they decry efforts to promote abortion bans by relying on medical inaccuracies. You're right. We should actually just ban abortions because they're unethical. So, you know, I guess we kind of agree there. At any rate, federal courts have put enforcement of the law on hold as they determine if it is constitutional. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals is set to hear arguments on the lawsuit Thursday. That would be tomorrow. So we'll have updates on that this Friday, Lord willing, of course. All right. So do we have anything else to discuss? I don't know that we do. Let me go ahead and I gotta ban this dude real quick. Get yourself out of here. All right. Sorry, I had a bot that I saw in the live chat there. Looks like that's just about all that we're going to have for today, because we've already gone 22 minutes over our hour. So if you guys are here with me, I want to say thank you very much for being here, and I appreciate you greatly. Please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel if you have not done so, to get, hit that bell to get notified. Hit that bell to get notified of every time that we go live. And of course, get this shared to all the different social media platforms which you frequent. What good is a message without an audience to hear it? And if you think this information is important for people to hear, then I certainly do appreciate the little vote of confidence that you give there. I do want to say real briefly, if anybody here is got like comments or anything like that that you want to have, throw them in the comment section below. I'm not usually quick to get to those, but nonetheless, I do try sometimes. But nonetheless, I do appreciate you guys, and I do try to get to answer your questions, right? I want to, well, actually, I can't really announce anything because I don't have anything set in stone. So let's go ahead and just go ahead and get out of here. That's the most redundant thing I think I've ever said my entire life, but I'm just having a rough day Englishing today. So if you would like to support us financially, if you think that this information is worth it, please do consider giving to the Patreon. You can also give one-time payments to our PayPal. Please do so with trepidation and only if you feel like this information is worth it. Want to go ahead and say shalom to you all. This has been the Watchdog exclusively on the Synagogue News. Think like a Neanderthal. And you, my watchdogs, I must ask you a question. In the face of Armageddon, will you compromise?